Greetings viewers. Are you ready to dive into a universe where ancient legends intertwine with modern concepts? Here, every soul's choice shapes the destiny of the world. Welcome to the world of Karam. Let's explore her path of fate together. Love life. Maybe it's not something you guys have done. Dolph brought another fruit to his lips as he spoke. Hakase and Karam, who were also enjoying meats and fruits, looked over at him. Think about it. It might be something that we brought among ourselves. There might not be any leveling to do. Karam opened her mouth to refute, but Dolph didn't stop to allow her the space to talk. Our world is behind anyway. You say there are billions of people on your planet, all with souls. Right, in that case, our world is out of order by not having spirits. As we have already advanced to this point without any, it's possible that this spiritual hole you've opened is for the benefit of all of us. No, there is no proof that you guys don't have spirits. Just because it's not a belief you hold doesn't mean that it is incorrect. What we call souls you might call consciousness. For all we know, spiritualists are literally using some kind of spirit power to do whatever it is that they do know. I have always felt that you have something that I don't. This might be what it is. Karam looked away from the excited Dolph. What she had that he felt wasn't spirit. It was something else entirely. Something that someone so young should never have to have. She could feel her dark thoughts taking over her again, but laughed at Dolph with a carefree smile. That's age, darling. A spirit isn't felt. What you're feeling is experience. She laughed at him. Anyway, I do miss it. Miss what? The experience. Don't you have that? Not that. Karam went to go hit Dolph, but instead was left holding her shoulder in pain. Age, I miss age after all. What can I do in this little body? She looked back and forth between the two clueless males in the room. Sex, I miss sex. Geez, can you two be any more clueless? The two had a feeling it wasn't their fault they weren't understanding. My choices are either to go after a perv that has a thing for kids, or become a perv and defile a child. And I'm not even into kids. Karam wiggled around, trying to throw a fit, but ended up in a coughing fit. Ishi, don't worry about it in this world. Age isn't an issue. You could probably seduce half the school with your experience. Hakase laughed, ignoring the pain she was in anyways. You do exude a heavily sexual aura. He bent forward and looked the small girl up and down. No matter what your form's age is, it's obvious to anyone who sees you that you're more adult than some adults are. She wasn't sure what to say to a thing like that. Was that really how it was, or were his eyes just adjusted for lawless? She looked to Dolph for help. Dolph had his chin in his hand and was nodding along with the Hakase. And when you walk you use your hips. When you crawl your form is stiff yet practiced, flowing and dynamic. I thought it was on purpose all this time. Dolph furrowed his brow. What else but in there? The Hakase exclaimed, pointing a finger to the ceiling. Dolph returned his gaze and laughed. You noticed that? How could I not, guys? She started doing it before she knew how to crawl. Too really. The two men speaking animatedly about her, but threw her through a loop and made her feel slightly uncomfortable. Guys know she's just always been like that. Even before. Hakase nodded enthusiastically. She liked to lean over desks a lot. When she wrote, she would set her chest on the table and have her arms out like this. He moaned, oh man. For an old man like me it was a great thing to see at the office. I've seen her do that. Dolph gasped. Well, sadly she hasn't gone through puberty yet. Hakase looked over at Karam's chest. Karam gasped and covered herself with her blanket. As they continued talking, Karam was thinking back on her own actions. In her past life, she had a large chest which did a number on her shoulders. At any point she could get, she would take the pressure off or cross her arms to rest. She also knew men were into larger breasts, and she'd used it to her advantage numerous times. It had actually backfired once, when she tried to use an unbuttoned shirt to get through the doors of a club that a gay man was guarding. Karam might have been a studious child, but it didn't mean she broke off all relationships. Only long-term relationships. If she remembered correctly to Japanese sizes. She was an 86 to do with anything. Pleasure-based relationships can be established at any point in life. Is there any reason young should stop someone from finding a healthy attitude about such things? Dolph's shocking statement brought Karam back to her life now. Where we come from, it's called pedophilia, and it's no ishi. Hakase glanced at Karam to find her looking shocked. Karam, who had been staring at Dolph, looked to the Hakase. What, you okay? Ya, just ya? She looked down at her hands. Why hadn't she thought of it before? Of course that was the answer. If there was anyone who would be willing to help her out with her unchildlike desires, then it would be the one person in the world who knows that she isn't a child. The mystery, and what she was shocked about most, was that she hadn't thought about it before. Fourth life. Why didn't she consider Dolph as a plaything? On Earth, every good-looking man sent sparks filled with many glorious, wondrous ideas through her head. Dolph was as beautiful as any other hot man on her planet. So why didn't it happen with him? It was most definitely not because she had lost the desire. Or was it? Karam tried to remember a time when she had looked at someone on this planet and drooled. Or looked at them and wondered what she might like to do to them. She couldn't think of a single time. Oh my God. I think I have died. Karam mumbled to herself, having lost the ability to follow Hakase and Dolph's conversation, with her shocking thoughts taking her attention. Hakase tuned out of what him and Dolph were talking about. Of course you did. That's how you got to be on Sunajunki. What? Karam looked over at him. She was pulled back into reality, and was lost for a moment, as she didn't realize that she'd said anything out loud. I said of course you died. I killed you, remember? No. I know that. Okay, my vagina, I think my vagina died. I haven't had a single dirty thought in years. How could I have missed this? She trailed off and held her head, mumbling to herself again about hormones. Hakase and Dolph both laughed. You will, Kara. When your body grows. Dolph smiled at her. He was slightly amazed at her innocence. Everyone knew that muscles are what gives one desires. Karam didn't have her fourth or fifth star yet, so it was no wonder she didn't have those desires or thoughts yet. You don't have puberty here. Karam, having heard Hakase tell Dolph all about what puberty is earlier, knew that puberty wasn't an ordinary thing around here. It's a little different for them. Sex is more of an act of allowing their overly grown muscles to relax. As you don't have the growth yet of those, it's no wonder you have clean thoughts. When you grow some more, it will naturally build. Oh. Well. Then I better hurry up and get my last few stars. Dolph nodded. Oh, ya, how many you have left? Hakase pricked up his ear. He wanted to show off how talented he was compared to the student that had always corrected him. I have to build muscle. Fight the dog. Then the 7th star test. The first level of muscle is kind of already done, but seems I'm going to have to wait to grow some more before then. So just skip it. Skip what? 4 and 5. That's what I did. Hakase shrugged as if it was natural. Oh. I don't have to do those. Karam and Dolph were both confused. Not anymore. Not here, at least. I went to Kinji Academy. I taught them how to make a gun, and they accepted my knowledge capabilities. Well, that and fighting off a number of rude upperclassmen, then beating their 2 years tests in 3 days. Well, there was also Hakase stopped. Let's just say I did a few things. They don't like me. But they had to accept my knowledge and physical prowess. Anyway, the upper-class schools have all taken to this new idea that there are numerous ways to fight. Oh wow, that's awesome. I didn't know you were so good at fighting. Hakase pressed his lips together so. You know how I was obsessed with reincarnation. Karam snorted. Reincarnation, Professor Hakase. Isn't that you? Well, my life on Earth wasn't my first life. The life before that was the life I learned to fight. Hakase avoided the eyes of Karam. He'd felt bad for keeping it from her all this time. But he knew he had to before. There was no longer any reason to hide it, seeing as this world was wrought with magic and newly reincarnated anyway. Damn, how many lives have you lived? This is my fourth. My first life was as a cat. Ironic. Right, think maybe I'll have 5 more. He laughed nervously, tousling his black hair. Dolph squinted at Hakase. Dolph couldn't seem to catch on due to his severe lack of information. What is a cat, and why does it mean that he will have more lives? Also, is Earth the planet Karam lived on before? When she was an older woman. Didn't Karam know everything about Hakase? How come she didn't know he'd had other lives? Isn't his lives what their relationship is based off of? Think there are other cats out there like you? Hakase shrugged. Slightly relieved she had accepted it so quickly. If there are, I've never met one. Where does that theory come from in the first place? The Egyptians. Think they might have been onto something. We should look into it. It's really just an old proverb, no one knows who said it originally. 9 is also known to be a magic number, and it could have simply been used for that reason. Cats have been both reared and feared throughout the ages. There's no way to know if there is any hidden meaning behind it. It could have simply been a coincidence. Karam face palmed. Of course you've looked into it. I'm so insensitive. I'm sorry. It's fine, rather. Thank you. He laughed at her briefly. What about you? You are a mysterious figure within the new kingdom. Okay, I think it's time to get you back to school. Dolph got up and tossed Hakase over his shoulder, all in a single smooth movement. Wait, Dolph. We need his help if we are going to figure this out. She hurried to call him back, but ended up in another coughing fit. Dolph paused. That's fine. But only after you graduate. If you don't need the 5th star, then it shouldn't take you more than a month to heal and do the last 2. Then we will get him through the proper channels and be on our way to greet your grandfather. Bracken. With that, Dolph opened the door and handed off the boy to Bracken, who had been waiting outside. Take him back to his academy. I'll take care of Karam. And as you pass by, send up another spiritualist. Okay, I want them to take another look at her. Make sure it's the same one. Is there only one spiritualist who knows my identity? Dolph nodded. If possible, I want to keep it that way. He returned to his chair next to the bed. How are you feeling? I'm all right. You called him Professor, right? I thought his name was Hakase. Hakase is how you say professor in Japanese. A professor is really just like a glorified teacher. Though he'd probably hit me for saying that. He was your teacher? No. I was his assistant in his research. He was amazing. There were all these connections that he made that nobody else could have figured out, that simply seemed to be obvious for him. Karam's eyes sparkled as she remembered her past. He's already published several theoretical papers of his own. In the whole world of Earth, he's the best in his field. Though, Karam calmed down and she looked off into the distance with a puzzled expression. There were some things that he couldn't grasp. He made amazing connections, but there were many obvious ones that he didn't seem to ever see. She shrugged. I would point out those few connections every once in a while. She smiled again, and her laughter again turned into a cough, but she continued. It started when I kept sneaking into his office to check out some of his genius ideas. Eventually, I got so tired of such obvious mistakes that I pointed them out to him. I was surprised he didn't kick me out of school. Instead, I became his assistant. Dolph smiled with her. He found that, even though he wasn't a very clear-thinking man, he wasn't a bad one either. At first he thought the writings on the wall were simply to spite Karam. But if he thought about it now, it might simply be one of those connections he hadn't made. He might not have thought she would try to kill herself to save the world. Dolph was right in his assumptions right then. With Bracken, he was just now questioning how she might have gotten her injuries. Kingly life. Karam took almost 2 weeks to heal fully. In that time, she had several weapons and survival requirements made for her 6th star. On her 2nd try she had brought down the rabid dog, and not many days later she had successfully finished surviving the forest on her own for a night. All just as Dolph had predicted. She graduated school with a small ceremony along with 3 others obtaining their Mao title. Needless to say, she was the youngest of her graduation class. She also may have caused a little bit of an uproar. Grandfather, I've come to discuss the possibility about the end of our world. In the throne room, Karam and Hakase bowed before 2 chairs. One chair was empty. In the other was a 30-year-old man with silver-white hair and an aura of unyielding confidence. Dolph stood behind the 2 children as they touched their foreheads to the pavement. Immediately following her statement, Prince Jasna stepped forward and began yelling. Karam, I didn't think school would have given you such preposterous ideas. Leave. Come back to apologize once you've cooled your head. Jasna, Rena, and a few others stood in lines on either side of the thrones. Karam lifted her head from her kowtow. Grandfather, please listen to my explanation. He looked down on her and squinted, but didn't move to either agree nor disagree with his first son. Grandfather, if you are willing to hear me out, then I hope to speak to you in private for this. She paused and hardened the look in her eyes to make sure he knew she was serious. Concerns the identity of the New Hope. One of the women next to Jasna spoke up. Are you saying that you are not her? Her voice was cold, but at the same time slightly hurt. Karam didn't respond. She only continued to stare into the eyes of her grandfather. The king. After a moment the king stood and motioned to Karam with his head that she should follow him. A few of the people in the line gasped, Father. The girl from earlier spoke out. You can't be serious. The 2 lines on either side of the thrones watched them leave into an adjoining room. Jasna and Rena followed them. In the room was a large table occupying most of the space. The king walked to the far end and took his seat at the end of the table. Karam stood at the other end while the others all took their own seat. After a moment Dolph pulled one of the empty chairs over to Karam for her to stand on because she wasn't tall enough to see over the top of the table. I'd first like to apologize, Jasna. Rena, I am not who you think I am. She glanced over at her parents before turning back to her grandfather. I am a consciousness from another world. I was murdered by my mentor Hakase. She pointed to Hakase. Hakase laughed nervously. Couldn't you have put it any nicer? Due to the way he cut me up that led to my death, I was able to move my spirit, or consciousness, from that world to this. I am actually a middle-aged woman called Ishi Ayono. Karam took a deep breath to calm her nerves and let the words sink in. No matter what. Admitting something like this took a lot of courage. Her family listened quietly. Jasna mostly taking his cue from his father. I'm afraid that in doing so we have opened up a hole. Through this hole is pulling others, like me and Hakase, to this world. On our last planet, we were researching reincarnation and spirits. We had come to believe that if there is a hole, such as the one we believe has been created, that the secondary world will eventually be wrought with destruction. We have already met with others. Karam continued until she felt they had all the information. After she had finished, the room was quiet. Karam, Dolph and Hakase were all watching the royal family. Though it was more correct to say that all eyes were on grandfather to see if he was about to believe such a story. How do I know this isn't just a rouse? Karam looked down. I've thought about it, but there really is no sure way. Marak, I've been with Karam since 2 weeks after she was born. The very day I met her, she admitted that she was a woman from another world. She did this. Marak is writing, which she had never seen before. That day, this, along with other strange actions, have led me to believe that it is the truth. Their world seems to have more knowledge as well. They have already found a possible cure for the castaways. Karam had never seen Dolph so serious before, so adult-like. It amazed her for a moment, but she briefly mentally thanked him and turned back to her grandfather. Marak watched Dolph for a moment before slowly turning his gaze to his son. Were you aware of this? Jasna shook his head. And no, I would never hide. Rena also shook her head, though not quite so violently. It was obvious she felt terrible. Karam gulped. Was Rena going to pull away from her after this? Is there a chance that she is simply a genius? Marak returned his gaze to Dolph. Dolph looked at Karam and Hakase, then back to Marak. In my mind there is no question. Hakase and Karam were obviously friendly before they had met each other on this world. Their language, actions, attitude, insights, and knowledge all support Karam's words. Marak turned slowly to Karam. As you are now, do you consider yourself Ishi or Karam? Karam and Dolph exchanged a glance. That had been one of the first questions Dolph had asked. As well, Karam smiled as she responded. No matter what you call me, I am who I am. But if you are asking me if I still consider myself Ishi Ayono, then I don't really have an answer for you. Earth is a part of me, but now so is Sunajunki. I am who I am. Even if it means that I am the woman who has taken over the real Karam. In her eyes was a glint of sadness, but she held her chest out and her chin high. Marak nodded. Then how do you propose we fix this? Accept life. They talked to Marak about their earlier conversations and admitted that they didn't have an answer. Karam had finally sat down when her father spoke up from next to Marak. If this is true, then I can understand why you left school. But Karam, he looked at his daughter coldly. I will not excuse this sort of behavior a second time. Father Karam looked at him shocked. It's all right. I forgive you. Dolph, on the other hand, he turned to glare at Dolph across from him. Father, that's not it. I've finished. Karam quickly stepped in her. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. I'm a Mao. I've already graduated here, see. She pushed her hair out of the way to show an ear piercing. In her last life, she'd had her ears pierced most of her life, so it was simply another thing to remind her of her past life. At the same time, remind her that she was no longer the woman she once was. Though it seems contradictory, it made sense in her own mind. Jasna stared at her with a furrowed brow. Marak also stared with his usual cold look, but Rena gasped. Already Dolph smiled at Marak. It only took her 2 tries to kill the beast assigned to her, and 2 days to finish the survival test. Marak furrowed his brow. Then why did it take you so long, huh? Karam jerked her head up at him. She wasn't sure he knew what she was when she'd started, but it seems he was aware of everything well. You see, when I saw the writing, I am. Karam had been hoping to leave this part out of her presentation. After a second, she remembered a conversation she had with Dolph. It was about how killing someone here wasn't worth much. From this she could deduct that suicide probably didn't mean that much. Either. Karam took a deep breath, looked at her grandfather and spoke clearly. I told you how on the wall was writing that could have only been from our world. What I didn't tell you is what it said. Roanoke is what was there for us. It has a historical significance by writing that. He was sending me a secret message letting me know about the whole. It held no significance for anyone else, as it was one of our many theories we had played with on Earth. But for me, I saw it and knew that this world would come to an end. That it would die because of my existence. Karam gulped again. An uncomfortable feeling rising in the pit of her stomach. And I tried to kill myself from that. I sustained injuries that left me incapable for 2 weeks. The next half week was when I fought the dog and found my way back from the middle of the forest. And the next half a week we picked up Hakase and traveled here. I'm sorry it took us so long to inform you. Dolph thought it would be best that I finish my schooling before we return. Karam bowed slightly in her chair and made sure not to leave anything out. Nothing to be sorry for, Kara. Graduating within a single month is unheard of. I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen your mark. Rena finally spoke up, voice full of concern, trying to relieve her daughter. The way she stuck up for Karam told her that her mother had already forgiven her. Karam felt relieved. She was sure her parents would refuse her. Once again, this change from her past life made her sure that this wasn't her previous life. Just like it wasn't her previous world. This meant that everything that had gone wrong before wasn't likely to happen here. If you had succeeded, would our world still be dying? Marak ignored her tears and her mother's soothing. Karam shook her head yes. But I didn't realize it until Dolph brought Hakase to me. She kept her eyes steady and chest out as she placed her hands on the table. Her feet were getting a little sore, and she hadn't slept very well in the carriage. Her little body wasn't made for staying up for 3 days straight after intensive outdoor training. Well, it might have been. But that didn't mean that she was used to it. None of them noticed the shock on Hakase's face when she had admitted to trying to kill herself. Marak hesitated, but it didn't show on his face. You are Karam Hocking from now on. You have taken over nobody but yourself. Either live up to it or let yourself down. The choice is yours, with his last strong words. He left the room, leaving the room as if it had paused in time. It sounded like an order, like a demand. But Karam didn't see it that way. Karam stared in also the closed door before tears once again ran down her face. Dolph picked her up and left the room, the others trailing behind them. His words had made her realize that it wasn't only her mothers that were different. She realized there wasn't only one person that loved her. But there wasn't only two either: Dolph, Jasna, Bracken, Yazin, Sabine, even Hakase. She also realized that it wasn't just them. In this world she was the new hope. She was in the position of someone that the entire kingdom looks to. Along with the happiness she felt, she also felt pressured. She had to live up to their standards. Just as Dolph had told Sabine all those years ago, if she dies, war. It was true if she didn't die either. Karam held the fate of the kingdom on her shoulders. All the things that she had to do. All the things that she couldn't do. Rushing through her head were ideas and plans and thoughts and dreams, all scratched out by the next. Karam leaned against Dolph as he walked her through the hallways. If she had to be what they wanted, could she never be who she is? Karam shook her head. Grandfather had already agreed to her words. That she was who she was no matter what they call her. She intended to stay true to her words. But what he said at the end about living up to it? As just some random Japanese woman, could she do it? She felt herself start to drift off from all the excitement today. Dolly, yes, she replied slowly. I hate this little body. Karam didn't bother listening for a response as her consciousness faded. As she fell asleep, she scolded herself. She hated this little body that couldn't hold up. She had things to do. She had to tell Rena that she loved her. and present their ideas about the stars and the castaways to grandfather. She had to become stronger because that's what was important in this world. She also had to see about spiritualist schools and GE. Good life. Thank you, Bracken. Rena entered the room behind Dolph to find Bracken situating Karam's clothes back into drawers. Bracken nodded. Dolph laid her on her bed on the opposite end of the room and moved away from the edge of the bed, taking up a chair above it. Rena sat down next to her daughter. Hakase and Jasna stayed awkwardly but the door. Yazin and Sabine were standing quietly against the wall, as they usually did when Karam's parents entered the room. Did I say something to make her like this? Rena glanced at Dolph. Dolph shrugged. I'm sure it was because of her past life's family. Hakase spoke up and walked closer to Rena. According to my calculations, she should have only been the daughter of a high shin. Instead, she became something of a legendary character. The only reason for that would be if she'd had a horrible life on Earth. Rena looked at her daughter's sleeping face. She never would have imagined that her little girl had already gone through her life. That she wasn't innocent any longer. When she slept, she looked so clean, so pure, it would be hard to believe for anybody. She insisted she had a good life, but I don't think she knows what good is. When she was my student, I could tell she hardly ate. Another student left some rice behind one day and she ate it. She said it was a waste. Hakase's face hardened. That rice was dry and hard. It had already gone bad by the time she'd eaten it. Rena whimpered. Jasna walked over and sat by his wife, hesitantly putting a hand on her shoulder. Rena turned and cried into his chest. Jasna stiffened and looked around the room, but finally began petting her head to try and calm her down. If it was any other time, Dolph would have laughed at Jasna, but even his head was lowered. Bracken and the two sisters watched quietly. When I asked her about it, she said that she'd always had someone who loved her and always had a roof over her head. She also said she had friends and family, but there's no way to confirm if it was a lie or the truth. Hakase watched the parents, or who he assumed were the parents, with sad eyes. His mind flashed back to when he had searched her emergency contacts to tell her family about her death. At this point, the police didn't suspect him. When he'd called the number she'd provided, the other end sounded sad, but not as if they were particularly close. He thought he might have been the closest person to her in her life, which made him regret what he had done even more. That was the moment he'd decided to follow her. Most of the cuts had to be made when someone was still alive. So if he could dull his own pain, he might be able to copy enough to end up where she was. Hakase studied the prince and princess. They weren't much older than he was. If they were older, then it might be possible that the New Hope was simply the next closest available high-up vessel. There might not have been any Haishari children to be born except her. Her life might not have been as horrible as he'd expected. He'd thought that maybe she was a princess. He had considered it briefly when he found out that there were only about a dozen Haishari in the entire kingdom. But if the princes and princesses are all older than Hakase, then it was highly unlikely to be possible. Or it's possible my calculations were off after all. We are 10 years apart in this world. If it went as planned, I would have been born within a year of her at the most. He said it with a sigh, as if he didn't care that they were crying for their daughter. He hoped it would ease their mind a bit. Jasna stood up, gently pushing Rena to the side, and grabbed Hakase. Aren't you the one who killed her in the first place? What are you doing here, just making us depressed? You have no right to be here with that. Hakase was thrown out the window of the 4th story of the building by a Haishari. Yazin, Sabine and Bracken exchanged looks. The princess was dead, had they heard that right? Dolph, when she wakes, escort her to my study. Her fiancé is arriving in a few days, and I want to alert her about him before he arrives. After making such a scene as throwing someone out a window, one would think that a flurry of people, accusations, and gasping would commence, but the only ones who reacted were the sisters when they spoke in hushed voices to one another. No one would suspect that the prince himself would go about business as usual. Even Rena hardly blinked at his actions. It was possible that she was thinking to do the same things. Dolph most certainly had, seeing as he thought killing him would be letting the Hakase off too easily. Bracken had simply come to know Hakase to be the one hated by everyone. Though it is possible that this sort of thing wasn't rarely seen. If it was normal only for Jasna, or their world was yet to be determined. Third life. 4 days later a reclusive High Shin arrived at the castle. Well, there wasn't exactly only one. We are glad you could make it, Mr. Dayak. Will your partners be joining us? Rena glanced at the closed carriage doors. The man mother called Mr. Dayak was a cute boy. He had light-colored hair, big eyes and an open face. He paused slightly and looked back at the carriage himself. Please, Pharrell is fine about them, thought him. They will catch up. Karam, of course, knew what the rocking carriage meant. Dolph, Rena, and Sabine also seemed to grasp the idea. Rena nodded at Sabine. Very well. I shall leave behind a worker to guide them to the main sitting room once they are ready. I'm sorry for causing you trouble. Pharrell bowed. Not at all. Rena smiled sweetly. Having two cute characters right next to each other made Karam feel like the sweet innocence of youngsters was what she would have called Mo. She almost sighed. Youth. What a beautiful thing, like she normally would have done, but she held back seeing as she still seemed like a toddler. But at her age a few 20-year-olds really did seem to be just beginning their life. Speaking of youngsters, Karam looked down at the small girl holding Pharrell's hand. She had short wavy blonde hair that was thick enough to spew out from the hood that covered her hair. Cat ear adorned. Her clothes were baggy over her slim figure. There was no question that her small face with red cheeks and large doe eyes made her much cuter than Karam. From what Karam could tell, she was probably only 1 year older than Karam as now. If you'll follow me, of course. Yazin took the lead to get the doors and the group disappeared inside. You know, Karam let go of the branch above her, letting her hang on the one she had been sitting on using only her legs. I thought my fiancé was coming. Geronimo, right? I thought it was a dude unless he's in the carriage. Dolph shifted out from behind the trunk of the tree. He was the one in the cat ears for a moment. Karam didn't reply. Dolph. I know he was chosen because of possible opposition being the new hope and all, but seriously. Karam grabbed the branch, swung down her legs while switching the side her hands were on and swinging back up onto a sitting position on her branch so that she could face Dolph. What the fucking hell? She yelled it with all the might in her tiny body. Dolph glanced around to be sure that only the busy carriage was within hearing distance. After all, who would believe that she'd already known those words without Dolph having taught them to her? I've been with another woman a few times and few time of my life, but I don't want to marry one. Karam was obviously bothered by this. Didn't your mother already say if you were still against it in 5 years, that she would find a way to get you a little more freedom? Well, but this still makes me one of those lowly bastards I hate. A effing lolican. Can't they find me a good-looking middle-aged man? Right? Dolph smirked at her. They'd talked about this before. Like your grandfather, right. Now that is a gorgeous man plus. He's not even 40 yet, and despite his appearance, he's nice and still loyally in love with his dead wife. He's kinda like perfect, not to mention his long, gorgeous silky hair that I would love to play with. Dolph finished with her exactly. Even you can't deny it. They smiled at each other a moment before bursting into laughter. Karam turned back to the carriage. Looks like the parents have finished, let's see. I hope my mother-in-law is nice, you bastard. After the finish. These two confusing words followed from the carriage. Karam, you know who his parents are. Before Dolph could warn Karam, the carriage door opened and two people stepped out. Karam's jaw dropped. Rashid and Ilka Dayak are married to Pharrell Dayak. Dolph explained. Not exactly sure what her expression means. The two who'd stepped out were both men. The first one, a face with an embarrassed and angry blush, was tall with the eyes of a devil and demeanor of an arrogant badass. He held his button-down shirt together in the front while trying to put his missing shoe on at the same time. The second one stepped out of the small carriage gracefully. He was short, but his cocky smirk and bold attitude made him seem like he had too much presence, almost entirely snuffing out the Yakuza next to him. What? Karam's eyes were wide as she pulled her jaw back up. Dolph facepalmed himself. He should have known 5 years was too much to ask. I am so jealous. Dolph paused and looked at her. Karam's eyes shone as she watched her two young hot, sexually active fathers on top of that. There's 3 of them. I'm looking forward to tonight's show. Karam giggled and slipped from the tree. She hurried over to the open window at the side of the house to slip back into the room. Dolph covered his face with his hands and mumbled something about perverts hating on other perverts before following her inside. Cake life. Karam was sitting patiently on her couch in the empty room, Dolph calmly standing behind her, as if she hadn't just scaled a tree. Jumped down from it. Ran 20 meters and jumped to a window sill twice her height seconds ago. They here yet cheek in her hand. Karam looked bored, so as to further support the fact that she had done what he had asked of her this time. Karam, her father, who'd just opened the door, scanned the room briefly to make sure she had followed his orders to stay put. When he seemed satisfied that she hadn't disobeyed, he turned around. Come meet your future husband finally. Karam jumped up. I was getting bored. Karam's smile split her face as she slid out of the room. Dolph knew the real reason for that smile, but her father was feeling that it was good she had obeyed him. He felt like he was just getting good at this father thing. Karam followed Jasna to the main sitting room. 2 couches on either side of a coffee table of tea and small fancy treats made her feel like she really was royalty. Karam popped a cake bite into her mouth and grabbed a chewy chocolate chip cookie before she looked at the people in the room. The 2 hotties from the carriage hadn't made it in yet, but Geronimo and Pharrell were sitting on the white and brown couch opposite Rena and Marak. Marak was glaring at her for jumping on the food, but he didn't say anything. Rather, he couldn't say anything. She was the one who'd provided them with these recipes. They'd become popular in the kingdom, according to Dolph. Sorry. Karam apologized to Pharrell after swallowing. It's just our cake bites are crave-worthy. Cake bites? Karam smiled, spurred on. Dolph held back a long sigh. The only thing she had done since finding out she could use the kitchen was brag about her cooking. You should take some home with you. They look like a brown waxed ball, but truth is that they are chewy on the inside. That gleam you see is from a nut to keep the chocolate we use as icing not melt. Karam smiled as she picked up another and brushed her finger across it as if to prove her point. They are safe for travel because of that. It's like edible plastic that tastes like candy. For the rest of the room, this transparent film wasn't anything new, though to Karam it was a groundbreaking discovery. There was a seed taken from inside a certain type of tree that, if put on the bottom shelf on the oven, will melt into vapor due to the heat while cooking and cover the inside with a thin sheet of sugar-like coating. The biggest problem was cleaning it from the oven after every few batches. For Karam, there was a different kind of problem. The chocolate would melt before the seeds had a chance to turn to vapor. Therefore she would steam the seeds, making ready-made vapor. Wait for it to fall from the lid to the bottom of the pan in droplets, and then cover the cake bites before it got cool and hardened. Though most of it was Dolph's idea, the film will protect it from both heat and water. It's hot and humid on the east border where you live. Right? When you close your lips around it, the cake bite it will burst. Karam pressed her lips together and blew up her cheeks, making her look adorable. And it doesn't even leave an aftertaste like candies usually do. The door opened behind her and Dolph, revealing Sabine escorting Ilka and Rashid. Karam didn't even falter. She turned to include them in her audience and continued. It's already returned to its fourth state, meaning it can't return to being a vapor, or a liquid that's left to coat your mouth. Karam made a sour expression as she remembered the candy she had before. It simply dissipates also. There are lots of flavors, so you'll never get bored. Karam smiled brightly. Pharrell, who had been wowing and ing all throughout her story, only made her more excited. But she popped the white cake bite she used to show Pharrell into her mouth and chewed. They aren't healthy, so it's not good to eat more than a few at tea time or after a meal with proper nutrients. She was more serious now. But somehow that was just as funny as when she was excitedly waving her arms in the air. I'd limit children to 3 a day and adults to 5. And because we aren't used to chocolate, take it slow at first. They aren't plums, but they will still make you sit on the pot. Karam giggled to a joke only she understood. I guess you guys probably wouldn't understand that, though. Karam took a bite of her cookie and took a seat next to her mother. If you are interested, I can prepare some for you guys to take back home. I even have a few recipes I haven't made yet that I know men would be interested in. Karam offered them kindly to the 3 men sitting across from her. You made these? Pharrell reached for a cake bite. Karam shrugged, kind of. He put it in his mouth and made sure to close his lips tight. His eyes widened before he began to chew. Karam has helped out with quite a few things since she's returned. Rena lovingly patted her daughter's head. I'm surprised myself at the ideas she's come up with. Marak nodded firmly. All of this, and motioned at the table full of treats, drinks, and unusual edibles. Ilka, the tall guy with the demon eyes, almost choked on his own cake bite. She made up all of these. He looked up and down at the table full of colorful, strategically placed variety. Rashid smirked down at Karam. Rumors about the New Kingdom's little genius has reached even my ears. I thought you'd be just another brawn over brain, but you can cook. To color me, impressed Rash. Pharrell hissed at him from the other end of the couch. Honey. Karam watched him coolly for a second before speaking out. Brawns without a brain will beat themselves to death, but brains over beauty is timeless. Though it is true I'm a Mal. That was due to taking advantage of a new cheat in the system and a great teacher. She motioned casually with her hand to Dolph standing next to her at the end of the couch as she shifted her position. You see, I skipped the 3rd star, so I'm anything but brawn. She shrugged, still smiling. Sorry if you're disappointed by that. Marak and Jasna, who hadn't spent much time with Karam, didn't know she wanted to become a spiritualist and therefore wasn't aware about her thoughts on the subject. Both of them, hearing it for the first time, furrowed their brows. To Rashid, it was obvious what she was doing. But he didn't take the bait. 3rd star her. That's been passed already. I heard a boy made his own rules a few years back. So they decided to remove that after all. Her. Karam smiled. She wanted his eyes to bulge like everyone else when they'd heard about that achievement, but he seemed to enjoy having the upper hand. She giggled slightly, remembering the sight at the carriage. I bet you can't go a moment without proving yours is bigger than the rest. Can you? She said it quietly, and most of the room was fairly innocent, so looks of confusion were briefly tossed around. Dolph cleared his throat, giving her a warning sorry. That wasn't proper. Karam immediately apologized and reached to accept her tea. Thanks Bracken, this is Karam, my daughter. Jasna introduced her. Yes. She put down her tea and bowed her head. I am Karam Hockingbryn, second star. Youngest princess of the new kingdom. Daughter of Jasna Hocking, first prince. And Rena Hocking, crown princess of the old kingdom. It is an honor to meet the four of you. Wow. You come up with that all by yourself. Rashin mocked her. But it was allowed because of their earlier back and forth. Of course he knew it was a proper greeting, please. Even a genius must be taught the basics. Don't give me too much credit, and modest. He raised his eyebrows at her. His smirk still plastered his face. Modesty is for the over-prideful. Truthfulness for those true to themselves and others. She paused. I don't believe you know the feeling of the latter. Dolph's lips pressed together. No woman has been able to read me. Even knowing me for years. Like you have read me in the past 5 minutes. What's your trick? Karam picked up her tea again. Her cool attitude showing itself through her slight smile on her otherwise clear face. I don't have one, I don't need one. It's as easy to read you as it is to tell that even though the two of you are in love with Pharrell, sex with each other is too good to turn down. She smirked just as Dolph again cleared his throat, but continued. I also know why it's so hard to turn down. Karam glanced at him through her lashes, as she bent forward to set her tea back on the saucer with a sly grin. Do you? He sighed and leaned back against the back of the couch, as if admitting his loss. You sure you are only 5 years old? There's a reason they call me a genius, you see. Rashid shook his head and chuckled. I gotta hand it to you, Marak. That's one hell of a granddaughter you got there. Marak nodded, agreed Lolita life. The adults continued talking while Karam, from there on out, stayed quietly to herself in her corner of the couch munching on treats. She tossed a wagashi over her head to Dolph and said quietly, so as to not interrupt the ongoing conversation next to her. You can laugh now, you know. Dolph pressed his lips together again, before leaning forward to whisper into her ear. You know he's never going to let you out of his family now. Right? Karam gasped quietly. Crap, what do I do? She looked back at him. He wiped cookie crumbs from her cheek while holding back laughter. I thought you wanted all the hot guys. Well sure, but crap, I've inadvertently become a lolicon. I'm worse than Hakase. Even though she was whispering Jasna, who was standing quietly behind the couch, with his usual gloomy atmosphere, hissed at her. Karam turned back around to focus in on the conversation again. She didn't understand most of it since it was mostly about laws about spiritualists, so the next pause she intervened. Why don't us kids go play while the adults talk? She knew they would agree since her parents both want them to get to know each other, and Geronimo looked bored. Marak nodded, but Rena accidentally spoke over him at the same time that Pharrell tried to agree. That's a great good-eyed. Karam ignored the awkwardness and smiled. Geronimo, do you know what a kitchen is? Karam has found that they aren't common here like they were on Earth. Every day the families go hunting together to find the new day's kill. Bleeding out the animal and cleaning the organs is normally done where the kill was made. It's done quickly before any other animals are drawn close enough. They will then take back the meat and eat it throughout the rest of the day. Some might be cooked and dried, but most of it is eaten raw. Beings made from stone have a higher immunity to raw foods. After Karam woke up and talked to her dad, she had a craving for cookie dough, which led her to the kitchen, where she found out how rustically they really lived. Ever since getting the ingredients for her beloved cookies, she's had it every night so far. Which wasn't as much as she might have liked Geronimo. The cute boy followed her outside the room. Young Princess Geronimo called after her cutely. You can call me Karam, can I call you Jer? Who do you think is taller, me or you? Geronimo ignored her HM. Karam paused in her step and turned to look at him. I'd say we are about the same, maybe you are taller. That's good, boys are supposed to be big and tough. Karam smiled at him. How old are you? His eyes sparkled. For you I'm 5. That means I'm bigger and older than you. So you follow me from now on. Karam paused. Are you a cat? Yes. He puffed out his little chest cutely and tried his best to look like the cool and older male that he thought he was. Cats are graceful and fierce creatures. You know what they do that isn't fierce? Karam asked. Acting innocently. She put one hand on the back of his waist and pulled him against her, and held his chin with her other hand. She leaned in next to him, bringing them closer than they should ever be, as an old woman and a kid. They purr after that. She blew a quick breath into his ear. He jerked away. He put his hand over his ear. I am the bigger one, so her as he spoke. His legs gave out beneath him and he fell to the floor. Karam, your charm could fool any man. It's unfair to use it on a child. Dolph looked down at them. Karam sighed. This didn't excite me at all. Karam pouted. Maybe I should just seduce Hakase. At least I wouldn't be tainting a youngster. She paused. Hold on. Sure, he's got way more charm than I do. Why am I getting scolded? Her why did my feet? Why can't I move? What why? Tears threatened to burst from the innocent and lost child as he sat shocked while Karam and Dolph bickered. Dolph looked at Karam while Karam glared back and said, tainting a youngster. Karam cursed. She knelt down and pulled one of the cake bites she swiped for him. She noticed that he hadn't tasted any of the treats because he was too nervous. Here, this'll make it better. Geronimo sniffled and pulled his hands away from his overflowing eyes. He didn't stop crying, but he was calming down, which was a good sign. What, sit. He hiccuped a few times and held out his hand. Bite half of it, then do this. Kara pushed her lips together exaggeratingly. He sniffled and did as he was told. He looked up at her for the next step and hiccuped again. Go ahead and chew on it now. Do you like it? His face lit up red. His haughty facade quickly disappeared behind his true crybaby self. He smiled up at Karam. Delish. Karam covered his mouth. Don't talk with your mouth full. Finish chewing first. She removed her hand. Geronimo finished off the other half while Karam watched him. Thinking finally. She thought to hell with it and helped him up. If you follow me, I'll give you more of these and other good things. Okay. Geronimo paused before nodding again. Okay. Does that mean my followers are yours? Well, they are your friends, not mine. Friends, yes. They are not followers, but friends. Okay. If you are nice to your friends, then they will be nice back, and you will get more friends. So from now on, call them friends. Okay. Kiki Papa says that friends stab your back. Kiki, is that Ilka ya? He said friends will stab your back, but followers can't because you are above them. I see. Well, they won't with me around. Okay. Karam smiled at the child and patted his head. Okay. He nodded again, and his smile returned to his little cute face. Karam sighed and petted his head some more. Children are so soothing. I've always wanted a kid. Let's go to the kitchens and get you lunch. After a brief sadness passed over her face, she made her voice light again to make Geronimo excited. You know how one normally talks to a kid. Okay. You are about to experience a sandwich. Karam laughed back in the main sitting room. It's good that our daughters get along. Rena sighed happily. She doesn't seem to have any friends her age, so this is a good opportunity for her. though normally this would have been something said to her husband alone. Rena had gotten drunk off of the atmosphere and spilled more than she normally would have. As a woman marrying into a family after Has died, she hadn't had many friends her own age, so it was a good chance for her to get to know someone her own age as well. Until now, she had always been uptight around others, putting on the facade of the head-over-heels princess she needed to be. Therefore, it's understandable to say that even at 19, when she's been an adult since becoming a Mao at 12, she could get drunk off of the atmosphere. On top of that, there was Marak, whom she trusted, and Pharrell, whom was welcoming and friendly to help her open up. She didn't expect to get a few strange looks when she said this, though. She thought there would only be echoes of agreement. Geronimo's male, though Ilka, being the most brash and straightforward of the bunch, revealed the problem. Rena gasped, "Oh, it's just he was so cute. I'm sorry. I'm sure he'll grow up to be a fine man. He'll grow up to be whatever he wants to be." Rashid sounded offended as he stuck up for his kid. And what's wrong with looking like a girl, huh? He can only hope he will grow up to be more masculine. On the other hand, Pharrell sighed and ignored Rashid. "Not this again. What's wrong with being who he is, huh?" Ilka sat quietly in his seat, enjoying a slice of cake. He didn't talk much, and his presence was next to nil next to the cocky yet cute Rashid. So even the kind Rena forgot he was there as she tried to calm the two down. "Who's to say it isn't?" Pharrell stood up to match Rashid, who was also standing, as they continued yelling at each other. Back in the kitchen, Karam's hand paused while slicing the ham, and she looked in the direction of the door. "Dad got mad. I wonder if Mom stepped on another landmine." "What?" "Nothing, Jer, keep laying it on the bread yet. Just like that. Hold on, I'm going to cut it now. Move your fingers and hands out of the way." Despite never having one of her own, Dolph thought Karam made a good mother, though the cook, who was watching them with Dolph, thought something different. She reminded herself to gossip about it later to her good friend. Join our community to discuss every twist and surprise in Karam's story. Subscribe to our channel, and let's look forward to the next adventure together. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to like and share.